we are going to be having a 4, maybe more part series on what is a union.
Yeah.
We wanted to do this because there, especially in the South, especially in right-to-work states where union membership is really low, there are a lot of people that just have no idea. They have no context for understanding what a union is. They don't know what it is, how you get one, who's in it, what does it do for you. They don't know anything about it. They don't, it sounds silly that maybe to folks that are in the labor movement, that are in unions, but there are legitimately people that I have talked to that just don't know what a union is. They've heard the word, but they have no idea what it is. And so we wanted to create a series that kind of goes through that step by step and just really, breaks it down to the fundamentals, because we feel like that's something that will help a lot of people understand what unions are and why they're important. We've got 4 parts in the series laid out that we want to talk about. The first is, what is a union like mechanically, structurally? What does it look like? The second is, we want to talk a little bit about labor history. Like, why is a union historically? Under what conditions did they arise? How did they arise? What happened? Just a little bit of history. I think that's important. It's important to know history so that you can apply that moving forward. The third is, what makes a union work? And what makes a union work presumes that a union works. So we'll be talking about statistics about what a union, like financially and in other cases does for workers. We'll be talking, because obviously unions do work. Unions provide much better pay, much better benefits for union workers. And so we'll be talking about some of those statistics, and then we'll be talking about why that is the case. And then the fourth part, we're going to be doing some union myth busting. So not going to be union busting, will be union myth busting. So, there's a lot of things that people hear about unions that are either totally not true, or they're lacking critical context, lots of other stuff. So those are the 4 parts of the series, and today is the first part. So we're going to be talking about what a union is mechanically and structurally today. We're going to be talking about what it looks like. And David has had decades in the labor movement. He has been in multiple different unions. He's been in multiple different positions in different unions. And so I'm going to be turning I'm going to be turning it over to him for the majority of this, adding a little bit of commentary. But I'm going to be turning it over to him now to talk about, so David, what is a union?
Yep. Good question. And this wasn't rehearsed, so I'm going to, right off the bat, I'm going to put Jacob under some pressure and say, up until the last few years, you weren't a union member. What did you, and I'm doing this out of, to put it in context, because you're a Southern worker. You grew up in the South, predominantly religious South, predominantly conservative South. What was your opinion of unions 5 years ago? If I'd asked you 5 years ago, right around leaving high school, going into college, what is a union? Tell me what you think, because I'm interested, because I sit here every day and I think, why can't we get people to join unions? Because of course I've been in one all my life. It's rare that I get the opportunity to hear from somebody. What is a union to you 5 years ago?
What is a union to me 5 years ago? I would have been one of those people that didn't know. I had heard of unions in history books, like I had heard about labor struggles in my history class. We talked about the Haymarket Affair a little bit. We talked about Eugene Debs and the Pullman strike. But I would have not, I would have said, I don't know really, if I was being honest, you know, I don't know, maybe senior in high school, I don't know how I not would have tried to BS something, but I legitimately just did not know. I had only heard the word and it didn't really mean anything to me. I didn't really have much of an opinion either way about it, because it just wasn't talked about. Like nobody in my family is in a union currently besides me. And I don't believe anybody in my family has ever been in a union. And so it's just, it wasn't even that I had a negative opinion. It's just I had no opinion. I had no frame of reference. I had never come in contact with anybody that was really that was a union worker or that was passionate about being a union worker. I just had no idea.
Yep. And I think that it would be the typical answer of just about everybody leaving high school, even though all the high school teachers, all the middle school teachers, all the elementary school teachers are in a union in the state of Alabama and across the nation. Most of your younger educated children have no clue. And probably one of those reasons is because we live in the state of Alabama, and the state of Alabama, the legislatures pick the curriculum for those schools. So yeah, nobody has a clue whenever they're coming out of high school what a union is. Plain and simple, a union is a democratic organization of workers. It's just the biggest touching point on that is democratic, because all the union officers, all the union officials, they're all elected. Even whenever you decide to join a union, it's done by election. It's done by majority rule. So it's very democratic, based on the way our nation was originally set up. A lot of times they're in related trades like the pipe fitters union, or the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the steam fitters. So they banded together a trade, and a lot of that comes from the early 1900s, whenever they wanted to really raise their level of expertise in a certain field. They started apprenticeship programs, and they really wanted these folks that were a member of their organization to be the most skilled that there was. And that's why, you know, even today you see a lot of people talk about buying union, because you know it's a quality product, because you know the folks that are building it are really, really good at what they do. Then you get a lot of, so that, you know, you got the trades groups. Then you have what they call the industrial unionization, that are kind of organized by industries, like the auto workers. Is a good point. Auto workers has been around since the early 20s with General Motors and Henry Ford, and they kind of banded together, not so much as trade work, but more as general laborers in an industry. And you know, they early on, which I don't want to delve into that, but I'll just say that, you know, earlier on, the skilled trades did not want your general laborers recognized in their union, because they looked at them as you know, the folks that really weren't skilled, they couldn't perform work as well as they thought that they should. So they kind of tried to isolate those folks. The machinist union, the ones that I'm a member of, they're an industrial union. They go across all different industries, but mainly they started out, believe it or not, it's easy to believe, because it started out as machinists, highly skilled railroad workers, but then they started branching out into aerospace. Nowadays they do medical, they do a lot of different things. And then lastly, but definitely not leastly, because they've led the movement in some of the worst times ever, you've got your solidarity unions, with your picture behind you with the IWW. uh, very, very typically strong militant unionists that they believe in the solidarity. When I say solidarity, I recognize that a lot of people don't understand that word, but the coming together of people with a common mission and, banding together and supporting each other through hard times and through good times. They're really not a trades group, even though there's a lot of the solidarity unions in specific trades, like the Stardust workers and the Burgerville workers with IWW. So yeah, that's generally your three, I guess, major structures of the unions. The biggest difference in solidarity unions and your trade unions and industrial unions is a lot of times they don't seek federal recognitions. They don't look for contracts in the workplace. They are very direct action focused. So when they want something, they band together and say, we want $2 an hour raise. They go to the boss. If they don't get it, they walk out. And that's kind of an oversimplification of it, because a lot of times they make several steps up the ladder. It's not generally just a walkout, but that's the premise of what their push is. It's just they don't really need government. They don't need politicians. They don't need much outside support in general. They are very independent and very demanding of what they want.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely solidarity unions. A lot of unions in the IWW would be considered solidarity unions, and
Yep.
There's definitely a much heavier focus on collective direct action as a means to achieve wins. It doesn't necessarily preclude fighting for contracts or federal recognition.
Yep.
Like the Burgerville Workers Union has been federally recognized. They won a union election, and they're fighting for a contract right now. But the emphasis is definitely on worker
direct action.
Walking out or doing a work to rule campaign or any other number of direct action by the workers, instead of like filing a grievance, let's say, with the NLRB, or filing an unfair labor practice or something like that, which are processes that are set up to ostensibly, help workers have their complaints be heard. And the solidarity union critique of that is that it's too long and it often doesn't work. And so instead of doing that, let's just go on strike, or let's have an hour walkout, or let's do a work to rule campaign or something else. Instead of going through this long and paperwork process, we have the power, let's just use it.
Yep. And so that's your three typical unions: trade unions, industrial unions, solidarity unions.
We talked about we talked about federal recognition. Could you talk about that a little bit more? What does it take to get federal recognition of as a union?
Yeah. So generally what happens as an organizer goes into a workplace, not physically into a workplace, but virtually into a workplace, speaking with the workers, generally on their own time, off-site. A lot of it's done privately. And basically what not so much the trade unions, because the trade unions are focused specifically on bringing workers in. Very generally unskilled workers come into the IBW or the pipe fitters union, and they have an apprenticeship program. They don't go out looking for workers. generally workers come to them because they know they've got good wages, they got good benefits, they got pension plans. They're already recognized under the federal government. The workers go directly into the apprenticeship program, go to work at various locations that they have contracts with. Industrial unions is the one that focus mainly on federal recognition. And what they will do is go in and look for skilled workers already in a specific industry that relates somewhat to their industry. And they'll try to get, typically they'll try to get around 60 to 70% of the workers in that, the wage workers, not the salaried workers, not management, but the waged workers in that industry to sign cards. And what those cards are is a lot of times they're referred to as A cards. They're authorization cards. And what that does is when a worker signs an authorization card, they are authorizing that union to speak on their behalf. And the speaking on their behalf is what they're saying is, we want you to petition the federal government, the National Labor Relations Board, to come in and hold a democratic election. And so at the point that they get, I think the minimum, I believe, is 40%. It may be 33 and a third, but I think it's somewhere in that range. If you can get 30 to 40% of the cards of the entire group signed, then the union will go to the NLRB in the state of Alabama. That's in Birmingham, and they will ask NLRB to come out and do a private election or an anonymous election. And what they'll do is set up a ballot box, generally on site, generally in a break room, a lunch area, something, an open area that all of the employees work in. And the employee will come by and say yay or nay for whether they want the union to represent them or not. If they get 50% of the workers plus one vote, then at that point they have a union. And the biggest thing is it goes back to what we originally talked about. It was democratic organization of workers. At the end of the day, the workers choose whether they want to form a union or not. If 50 plus one want to choose, then at that point they are federally recognized as a union. In other words, they can, the federal government recognizes that they are a member of, if it was a machinist or AFGE or the Teamsters or UAW, any union that they decide that they want to join up with, then at that point they're chartered under that union, under that national union or international union. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So and so we go on down to the unions in general is a larger part of the labor movement. Most of your unions are affiliated with the AFL-CIO-CLC, the American Federation of Labor. It's
Congress of Industrial Organizations and the Canadian Labor Council.
Yep. They can be affiliated with them. That's kind of what I'm struggling with, because the labor movement, because it is such a democratic movement, it allows every local, every district, every international, the ability to choose what they want to do. So whenever I say most of them are affiliated with the AFL-CIO, CLC, it's up to the individual groups. Several of them are not. The AFL-CIO, CLC makes up one of the numerous parts of the labor movement in general. Then you got the national unions, which we talked about with the machinists, AFGE, Teamsters, steel workers. They just go on and on. associations that typically choose to affiliate with unions. You've got the districts or regional offices, and this is more of a hierarchical with your national at the top, your districts, regional offices, and it spreads down. And then, of course, as the pyramid comes down, it gets wider and wider. You've got hundreds of local lodges affiliated underneath the national union. And generally, they're also affiliated through a district, but they certainly don't have to be. You'll see a lot of the local lodges or local unions that may make up 5, 6, 7,000 member union, and they've got the support within their own local that they don't really need a district, so they'll affiliate directly with a national union and they'll bypass a district. And all of these, man, it gets very convoluted, but all of these, at the end of the day, when you organize your union in your workplace, you're a local union, and regardless of everything else, you have final say on what happens in your local. And whether you choose to affiliate with a district and things like that is generally voted on democratically. And so what a district does is they're that middle ground between your national or international unions and your locals, and they provide a lot of the administrative support that those folks may not generally have at a local level. A lot of your districts, they call them business agents or business managers or business representatives, and what those folks do is come in and help negotiate your contracts at your local level, where you may not have the support in the local. Most of the time, all of your locals are going to be run by volunteers. So, like myself, like yourself, everything that we do is on a voluntary basis. We're not gaining wages by going out here and organizing workers. So,
right. So you mentioned some of the structures. So we've got your international or national unions, which would be, you mentioned, like the Teamsters, like the machinists, and they've got this international organization, and then they've got districts or regions, and then you've got locals. And then separately from that, you've got affiliations of unions, which would be the AFL-CIO, CLC. And they have a national president, and the internationals affiliate with the AFL-CIO, CLC. And so the Teamsters, and are the Teamsters part of the AFL-CIO?
I believe the Teamsters split off a few years ago and formed their own. So
AFGE, RWDSU, the machinists, and any number of others, we're all part of the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO, or our international unions, are all part of the international AFL-CIO, CLC. And that affiliation of unions also has regional bodies called central labor councils. And they operate as, like just kind of mini versions of the AFL-CIO, CLC. And can you talk a little bit, you talked about what the internationals and the districts do. Can you talk a little bit about what the AFL-CIO does on an international level? Like what, the president of the AFL-CIO is Trumpka, and then talk about what the central labor councils do.
Yeah, so basically the AFL, and we'll get into this a little bit later in a different episode. I didn't really want to talk about this a whole lot because it becomes vastly overwhelming. But the real quick and dirty of it is the AFL-CIO is there because you have the machinists, you have the AFGE, you have the Teamsters, you have IBEW, you've got steel workers, you've got all these unions spread out all across the United States and internationally into Canada. And everyone's run democratically and independently. And what the AFL-CIO is there to do is to bridge the gap between all these unions and make sure that we're all pushing for the exact same thing. Now that don't mean exactly we're all pushing for the same wages, the same benefits, but at the political level, what they're trying to do is bring everybody together, use that power of solidarity between everyone, and make those changes in Congress. A good example of that would be the Civil Rights Act. Without the Civil Rights Act, without the AFL-CIO, and without all the unions, we would not have the Civil Rights Act. We wouldn't have the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, which allows workers to organize and form unions. So basically what the AFL-CIO is they really have no authority over any unions whatsoever, but what they try to do is bring together all the unions and push for one big, they bring the labor movement together, I guess is the easiest way to explain that. And so, yeah. And I guess while we're talking about that, it probably wouldn't hurt to say a lot of people don't recognize this, but the Civil Rights Act and Dr. King, most of us in the South, we grew up knowing Dr. Martin Luther King, but what a lot of people don't realize is Dr. King was a big proponent of unions, a big proponent of organized labor. When the March to Selma happened and Dr. King was arrested, UAW was the organization that bailed him out to the tune of $160,000. They bailed him out of jail. So, there's always been this thing of equality, and we'll touch on that later as well. You start blurring the lines, and we're trying to keep it with unions, and we'll stick with unions. But I think that's an important point to point out.
It's definitely an important point. The last speech that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. ever gave was in Memphis in support of striking sanitation workers. And everybody knows that he was in Memphis when he died, but nobody knows why he was there. And he was there supporting workers and supporting unions and striking workers. And so, that's definitely an important point. So you talked about how the AFL-CIO internationally kind of functions as trying to offer some political cohesion to the labor movement. And so that's kind of what the central labor councils do at the regional level. The different regions and different states have central labor councils, and so they try to bring all of the unions together in the area together to push for certain certain issues that are locally resonant. So
and that's one of the biggest, and that's why this whole discussion gets so convoluted as you go across everything, is the fact that your local lodges, your district lodges, your internationals, your AFL-CIO, and all of this brings together such a great group of people that do work that is so dynamic, not just to somebody's pay, that it's difficult to speak about everything without going into a diatribe on civil rights or the women's right to vote or things like that, because they're all hand in hand.
It's definitely all hand in hand, and so we've been talking about the AFL-CIO and these labor affiliations, different labor movement affiliations, and it's just worth mentioning that there are independent unions. You can form a union at your workplace and just not affiliate with any international union, not affiliate with the AFL-CIO. That's a thing that you can do. There are also international and national unions that are not affiliated with the AFL-CIO. You mentioned the Teamsters. The UAW is not affiliated with the AFL-CIO anymore. The UAW and a couple other unions are in another labor federation called CTW, Change to Win. They broke off from the AFL-CIO a few years ago. CWA, I found this out the other day, is a member of CTW and the AFL-CIO. Thought that was interesting. The IWW is not a member of CTW or AFL-CIO. They're an independent labor organization. And so, you know, the AFL-CIO definitely makes up most international unions, or a really large part of international unions are affiliated with AFL-CIO. And so, you know, talking about those structures kind of takes care of most of it. But it's just worth mentioning that there are other forms of you know, you don't have to, you can have a union and not be affiliated with any of these other international unions. And there are international unions that are not affiliated with the AFL-CIO.
You just watched a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We're in North Alabama talking about the news for workers, by workers. We're going to be on the radio on 92.5 FM, 770 AM in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area on Saturdays from 9:30 to 11 AM beginning in May. We believe that this is a really good opportunity to put new ideas in front of a conservative talk show audience. This is an audience that has never so much as heard the word union in a positive light. But we need help raising the funds to purchase the airtime. So if you could afford to send us a few bucks, you can do that by going to patreon.com/thevalleylaborreport. If you can't afford to do that, that's fine too. There are a lot of people going through some really rough times right now. So if you could just share our videos, that would be really helpful. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you.